Let's face it, the threat of hydrogen bomb warfare is the greatest danger our nation has ever known. Enemy jet bombers carrying nuclear weapons can sweep over a variety of routes and drop bombs on any important target in the United States. The threat of this destruction has affected our way of life in every city, town, and village from coast to coast. These are the signs of the time. Only in practice now, a rehearsal, a training exercise. But tomorrow, this siren may mean the real thing. And if you hear it, as you drive in your auto, as you sit in your office, or work at your bench, wherever you are, what will you do? What will happen to you?
Curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe: Warsaw, Berlin, Prague.
Few could have seen the true dimensions and implications of Churchill's Iron Curtain speech in 1949, only 4 years after the summit ending the Second World War. However, by the time Churchill presented his speech, the world was at war again. It was no longer a simple face-to-face conflict, but a jigsaw of covert operations and proxy battles. For half a century, the world would be divided into two camps. Deputy Chief of the U.S. Mission in Moscow, George Kennan, wrote in 1946 a telegram outlining the conflict between the two inherent, between the two world systems of free market capitalism and state-controlled communism. In summary, we have here a political force committed fanatically to the belief that, with the US, there can be no permanent modus vivendi, that it is desirable and necessary that the internal harmony of our society be disrupted, our traditional way of life be destroyed, the international authority of our state be broken. Apart from a few exceptions, the Cold War was a war for information. It was about being one step ahead of your enemies and know their every move. Under the administration of President Eisenhower, the use of covert operations, run by Director of Central Intelligence Allen Dulles, became a prominent and often used tool in the fight against communism expansion during the Cold War. It was with these covert operations that both the United States and the Soviet Union attempted to undermine the other and gain secrets which would balance the tip of the conflict to their favor. Eisenhower worried that with the increased defense spending, the strength of the US economy might dramatically decrease. He therefore looked towards a new foreign policy, New Look, which consisted on fighting against communist expansion while keeping defense spending low by using covert operations instead of full-out military intervention.
$500,000 of your fellow Americans to lead a great crusade for freedom in America and freedom in the world.
It was with these covert operations that both the United States and the Soviet Union attempted to undermine the other and gain secrets which would balance the tip of the conflict to their favor. The origins of the CIA may be traced way back to 1942 to its forerunner, the Office of Strategic Services, also known as the OSS. Theodore Roosevelt and his military advisors acknowledged the pivotal role of the British Secret Services in the resistance during the war, and foreseeing conflict, they appointed William J. Donovan as a director of the new organization. The OSS was given the responsibility for clandestine activities, research and analysis of intelligence. Following the conclusion of World War II and the growing threat posed by their communist counterparts, Truman, the president at the time, saw the need for a central intelligence organization like the OSS. Therefore, it was under the Truman administration that the National Security Act of 1947 was signed, establishing the Central Intelligence Agency. This act charged the CIA with the coordination of the nation's intelligence activities and correlation, evaluation, and dissemination of intelligence affecting its national security. However, it was not until 1949, following the Soviet nuclear test, that the CIA Act was passed, granting the CIA more powers, such as the use of confidential, fiscal, and administrative procedures. Throughout the Cold War, the CIA has been the main blunt tool of the United States. The young agency participated in activities which ranged from general surveillance of suspected Soviet agents to the toppling of governments.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
One of the most well-known operations of the CIA was the Bay of Pigs invasion. The invasion of 1959 to 1961 consisted of 1,500 Cuban exiles trained by the CIA in an effort to take out Fidel Castro's Communist Party from taking over. Once failed, the CIA looked towards other strategies, such as numerous assassination attempts on the Cuban leader. Another well-known case involves the U-2 flights. These specialized high-altitude spy planes, developed and tested in Area 51, were specially designed to fly over Soviet territory to collect data about military facilities, armaments, and troop movements. However, the shooting down of these planes over Soviet and Cuban territory threatened to blanket the world with nuclear war. The CIA participated in other operations, such as Project Azorian, an $800 million attempt to recover codebooks and nuclear technology from a sunken Soviet sub. Project MK Ultra was developed during 1953 and 1960 and attempted to develop effective interrogation and mind-controlling strategies by the use of hypnosis and mind-altering drugs. One communist regime in the Western Hemisphere was enough for the United States, which is why when they received reports of a communist party in Chile gaining popularity, they decided to take the necessary measures, fearing that victory from that group would hurt the U.S. national interest.
I directed that an approach be made to both the State Department and Mr. Kissinger's office to tell them that we had grave concern over the outlook for ITT's investment, and we were desirous of discussing our thoughts in Washington and willing to assist financially in any government plan to help protect private American investment.
The CIA was used to exert influence on Chilean politics, an attempt to stop the rise of a communist government throughout the 60s and the 70s. The leader of the so-called communist government, Salvador Allende, was viewed as a threat, and the CIA's main goal was to block Allende from becoming president of Chile.
Tienen que respetar el derecho de los pueblos a desarrollar su economía en la forma que necesita o desea.
These actions began officially in 1962 with a 5412 panel special group in charge of reviewing proposed covered actions, approving a program of financial assistance to the Christian Democratic Party, in an attempt to support the candidate for the 1964 presidential elections, Eduardo Frei. That same year, the CIA also began supporting a civic group that undertook propaganda activities. These actions began officially in 1962 with a 5412 panel special group in charge of reviewing proposed covered actions, approving a program of financial assistance to the Christian Democratic Party, in an attempt to support the candidate for the 1964 presidential elections, Eduardo Frei. That same year, the CIA also began supporting a civic group that undertook propaganda activities. During the next 2 years, in an attempt to block Allende from being elected in the presidential elections on September 1964, the 5412 group and its successor, the 303 Committee, aided the opposing parties in their political campaigns through payments and covert assistance. The results of the elections were a majority for Eduardo Frei, with 56.9% of the votes. Up until the presidential election of 1970, the 303 Committee and its successor, the 40 Committee, gave covert assistance to moderate candidates for the congressional elections of 1965 and 1969, set up propaganda workshops, and influenced the country's radio and media. However, and despite the CIA's attempt to carry out spoiling operations, Allende was victorious in the presidential elections of 1970. After his victory, Track 1 operations, as they were called, were used to block Allende from taking office by influencing the congressional vote, given that Allende did not win an absolute majority. Track 2 operations were also used, in which the CIA attempted to instigate a coup to prevent Allende from taking office. A coup did occur in 1970, but the CIA claims that it was a radical group that had taken action without CIA consent, for they had withdrawn their support 4 days before the attack. The result of the coup was the death of Army Commander René Schneider, who was supposed to be the target that had to be kidnapped during the assault. Despite that, Allende's government ruled for 3 more years. During these years, the CIA redirected Track 1 operations, spending millions of dollars to strengthen opposition parties, and assisting the militant right-wing groups so as to undermine Allende and his government, thus creating a tense environment throughout Chile.
Se proponía el estrangulamiento económico, el sabotaje diplomático, el desorden social, crear el pánico en la población para que al ser sobrepasado el gobierno, las Fuerzas Armadas fueran impulsadas a quebrar el régimen democrático e imponer una dictadura.
Preparamos alguna gente
We trained people for his personal security.
para la seguridad personal en la cual teníamos experiencia. Porque
We were experienced in this because we had to defend ourselves against those who wanted to destroy us.
liquidarnos.
We told him about this because we thought he had enemies who might try to take his life.
Atentar contra.
In 1973, however, another coup took place and ended Allende's government, along with his life due to a suicidal action. General Pinochet took Allende's place, enforcing a rightist government and persecuting all leftists and political opponents just months after the coup, which was viewed badly by the CIA. However, they still offered services to the government, such as identifying and training to combat outside targets. They also continued ongoing propaganda projects. In 1979, the Soviet Union launched an attack against Afghanistan. The CIA reached the Afghani rebel groups through Pakistani intelligence services and provided them aid. While Moscow supported the Calc allies, the CIA would fund the Afghans.
Entirely true that this was a war that was fought with our gold, but with their blood.
The fighting continued throughout the 1980s, until at 1988, Moscow decided to withdraw due to substantial losses and the excessive costs of the war. However, rebel forces and the Calc regime still continued the fighting despite the loss of Soviet support. The CIA ended its aid sometime after the pro-Russian government in Kabul, capital of Afghanistan, fell, and the Taliban emerged. It was also through the training of the CIA that Osama bin Laden, most famously known for being held responsible for the attacks on the US on September 11, 2003, emerged as a rich and powerful man. During the bitter years of the Cold War, the CIA became the backbone enforcer of American ideals overseas. Having a profound impact on the country's foreign policy and exportation of American values through clandestine operations around the globe, it can easily be stated that the outcome of the Cold War would have been greatly different without this secretive administration. Although at times the CIA's actions contradicted the American dream of freedom, liberty, and justice, in American eyes, anything was better than a communist dictatorship. Its clandestine operations proved that the agency was a tool of American power and could ignore the very ideals of justice, peace, and liberty in order to protect them.
Getting yo.
You can take a swing at my ego. You can make a run for my crowd. Even if and only your people, you ain't gonna take us down. You can aim your evil right at us. You can drop your bombs on the ground. Even if you stand like green and red, you ain't gonna phoenix we will rise up from the ashes. This world is ours tonight. We'll go on forever like the phoenix we will rise. We will rise.
Getting yo.
You can take a swing at my eagle. You can make a run for my crown. Even with an army of people, you ain't gonna take us down. You can aim your evil at us. You can drop your bombs out of the ground. Even if you stand between us, you ain't gonna take us There'll be no need for crying if darkness fills the skies. We'll go on forever like the phoenix we will rise up from the ashes. This world is ours tonight. We'll go on forever like the phoenix we will rise. We will rise.
Getting yo.